Light poured across the great hall like something molten. Gold banners hung from the rafters. Crystal blazed overhead. 1,000 faces turned upward toward the high dais, and Kaelan Ashvale stood above them all. And still he could not settle. Founding night. The oldest celebration the pack kept. Once a year, the whole territory gathered beneath one roof to remember the blood that had built it. Warriors in their finest, elders in their furs, servers weaving between the long tables with silver trays. Every important wolf in the kingdom stood in this room tonight, and every one of them had come to see their alpha king take his place before the coming wedding. Kaelan felt none of it. His wolf had been restless since sundown, pacing, circling, refusing to lie down. Twice already that evening the beast had lifted its head for no reason at all, ears pricked, hackles rising, as though it had caught a scent no one else could smell. Kaelan could not name the cause, and that unsettled him more than any enemy ever had. He had ruled this territory for 9 years. He did not frighten. Yet tonight something under his skin would not go quiet. Ophira stood at his side, radiant in silver, one hand resting lightly on his arm. His intended, the future, Luna. She spoke to the elders with practiced grace, laughing at the right moments, offering the right words to the right wolves. She was everything the pack expected of a queen, everything the throne required, and still his eyes kept drifting away from her. There, near the far wall, a server, dark hair pinned back beneath a plain gray cap. She moved through the crowd without drawing a single eye, quiet, careful, keeping her head low and her hands busy. Nothing about her should have mattered. She was one of 100 hired hands brought in for the night, faces the household would forget by morning. Yet the moment Kaelan looked at her, his wolf went utterly still. Not with desire, not even with curiosity. Something older than both, recognition, as though some buried part of him knew her, knew the exact shape of her. Though his waking mind swore they had never once met, he shook the feeling off. He was tired. He was overworked. The wedding was a month away, and the whole kingdom seemed to want a piece of him. That was all this was. A man stretched thin, imagining ghost. Then the server lifted her head. For half a heartbeat, across the crowded, glittering hall, her eyes found his, and the world came apart. The first shot shattered the great chandelier. Light rained down in a storm of falling crystal. The second took a guard off his feet before he could reach for his weapon. Screams tore through the hall. The music died mid-note. A table went over somewhere, and then everyone was moving at once, a panicked flood of bodies surging for the doors. Kaelan moved on instinct. He seized Ophira and thrust her behind the marble pillar at the back of the dais. "Down," he snarled. "Stay down." His power exploded outward, alpha command rolling across the room like a physical wave, and half the pack dropped low without deciding to. More shots. Muzzle flashes near the eastern gallery, not rogues. Rogues did not carry guns. This was planned. This was aimed. His wolf understood before his mind could, and it wanted blood on its teeth. Doran was already roaring orders, his warriors fanning out through the smoke, driving the crowd toward the exits, hunting the shooters. Kaelan should have gone with them. Every law of the king told him to lead the counterattack from the front, but his wolf pulled him the other way. It dragged him off the dais and into the chaos, past overturned tables, past the fallen, past the fleeing. It hauled him toward the far wall, toward the coat gallery behind the servers' stations, toward her. He did not question it. He had stopped questioning it the moment the glass began to fall. "My king," a warrior shouted somewhere behind him. "The shooters are this way." Kaelan did not turn. He could not have turned if the whole hall had ordered it. Every step he took away from the fight felt more right than anything he had done in years, and he could not have said why, only that the pole had a name he did not yet know, and that name was waiting for him in the dark at the back of the room. The gallery was dark and narrow, hung with cloaks, thick with the smell of powder and fear. Kaelan slowed, his heart slammed against his ribs. Something was wrong here, something beneath the shooting, something his wolf had been trying to tell him all night long. Then he saw her. She lay on the floor between two coat racks, folded over something. Her whole body curved into a shield. Her hair was loose now, spilling dark across the boards. One arm was flung wide. The other was locked tight around a small shape beneath her. A thin, dark line ran from her shoulder across the floor. Kalen forgot how to breathe. He crossed the distance in a single stride and dropped to his knees at her side. She was alive. Her chest rose. It fell, shallow and far too quick. But there. She had been struck high on the shoulder, and even now, even senseless, she had not loosened her hold on whatever she guarded. Kalen slid one arm beneath her, gentle as he had ever been with anything living, and eased her weight back. A child looked up at him. A little boy, no more than 5 years old, curled in the hollow of her body where no bullet could reach. Not a scratch on him. His small hands were fisted in the front of her uniform. His face was wet with tears, and his eyes, huge and terrified, were fixed on Kalen's. The Alpha King stopped breathing entirely, because he knew that face. The same dark hair, curling at the ends, the same stubborn, set to the jaw, the same pale storm-gray eyes, the exact shade Kalen found every morning in the glass. Not similar, not close. The same. As though someone had reached into his own reflection and drawn a child out of it whole, the floor tilted beneath him. For one long, impossible moment, the shooting and the screaming and the smoke all fell away, and there was nothing in the whole world but that small, upturned face and the certainty rising in his chest like floodwater. His wolf surged up so hard it stole the strength from his arms. One word broke through the roar of his own blood, a word that made no sense, a word he had no earthly right to feel. Mine. Kalen crushed it down. Impossible. He had never seen this woman before tonight. He had never seen this child. He had no son. The kingdom would have known. He would have known. A man did not forget his own blood. The little boy's lip trembled. His frightened gaze dropped to the woman between them, to the dark stain spreading beneath her, and his whole small body began to shake. Then he looked up again, and his fingers reached out and closed around her sleeve, holding on the way a drowning thing holds on to the last solid thing in the world. At that same moment, the woman stirred. Her lashes fluttered. Her lips parted. She was trying to speak, and Kalen bent low to catch it, close enough to feel the thread of her breath against his cheek. Her hand rose from the floor, shaking, and gripped the front of his shirt with the last of her strength. Her eyes opened. They found his. And what lived in them was not the fear of a gunman at all. It was fear of him. Please, she breathed. Her voice was barely there. Please, do not let them see his eyes. Then her hand slid away, and she went limp against him, and the little boy threw back his head and began to scream. The ride back to the estate passed like a fever dream. Kalen held her the whole way. The woman lay unconscious across his lap in the back of the armored car, her shoulder bound with a strip torn from his own shirt. The boy sat pressed against her other side, one small fist still knotted in her sleeve. He had not let go once. Not when the warriors lifted her from the floor. Not when the doors slammed shut. Not for a single mile of the dark road home. And he watched Kalen the entire way. Every time their eyes met, the child looked away fast, as though being seen were dangerous, as though Kalen himself were the danger. The look put a strange ache in the Alpha King's chest, and his wolf hated it, and neither of them understood why. The gates of the Ashvale estate stood open when they arrived. The great house blazed with light. Warriors lined the drive. Ward had run ahead of them the way Ward always did, and half the household had gathered in the wide stone entrance hall to see what their king was carrying home. They saw a bleeding servant in his arms and a strange child at her side, and the hall fell silent. Kylan carried her straight through them. "Move," he said, and they moved. He took her to the east wing, to the infirmary the old physician kept, and laid her on the clean white bed with his own hands. Alden was already waiting, sleeves rolled, hands scrubbed. The boy tried to climb up after her. A young nurse reached to stop him, and he came apart, kicking, twisting, a thin animal cry rising from his chest. Not a tantrum. Terror. Pure and total. As though letting go of her for 1 second meant losing her forever. Kaelin lifted a hand. Let him, he said quietly. They let him. The child scrambled onto the edge of the bed and gripped the woman's hand in both of his, and only then did the crying stop. He tucked himself against her uninjured side and went still watchful, guarding her with his whole tiny body. The old physician worked in silence for a long time. Once, as he leaned close to check the boy for hidden wounds, he paused. A thin leather cord hung around the child's neck, half hidden beneath his collar. Threaded onto it was a ring. A man's signet, old and worn smooth, far too large for any child to wear on his hand. Alden's brow furrowed. He glanced at it, then at the sleeping woman, then said nothing, and moved on. Kaelin saw the ring, and did not see it. His eyes passed over it. The way eyes pass over a thing the mind is not yet ready to hold. When at last the physician straightened, his face was grave, and his gaze would not stay still. It moved to the woman, to the child, to the woman again. Then, carefully, to Kaelin. Say it, Kaelin told him. His Majesty already knows what I mean to ask. The whole room knew. Kaelin could feel it pressing in from every servant and guard along the walls. The resemblance was too much, too exact. Every time the boy turned his head, another wolf drew a sharp breath and looked away. The physician cleared his throat. Forgiven old man. He nodded toward the sleeping child. Whose son is this? The question hung in the air like smoke. Kaelin looked at the boy. The boy looked at his mother. Neither of them answered, because one could not, and the other did not know how. And Kaelin, Alpha King of the whole territory, a man who kept an answer for everything, opened his mouth and found he had none. I do not know, he said. The words came out hollow. He did not believe them himself. That was the moment his wolf made a liar of him. Because as he looked down at that small, sleeping shape, at the dark curls and the storm-gray eyes, a certainty rose in him with no evidence and no memory behind it. It rose anyway, from somewhere far below where reason lived, and when Kaelin spoke again, the word that left his mouth was not a word a king says to a stranger and her child. They are family, he said. See that they are treated as family. No one lays a hand on them without my word. Silence crashed down over the infirmary. The servants stared. Alden stared. Near the door a cup slipped from a maid's hand and shattered on the stone. Family. The Alpha King had named a bleeding servant and a nameless child, his family one day, into knowing them, 1 month before his wedding to another woman. Kaelin heard the word land. He heard how impossible it sounded. And the worst of it, the part that turned the floor to water beneath his boots, was that he had not chosen to say it. It had come on its own, torn out of that same buried place his wolf kept clawing at, as though some part of him already knew the truth, and had only been waiting all these years for a reason to speak it aloud. Kaelin looked down at the child holding his mother's hand, and the certainty inside him grew teeth. The word family had not finished echoing when the doors opened again. Ophira came in first. She had traded the ruined silver gown for something dark and plain, but her composure was already back in place, smooth and perfect as glass. Behind her walked an older woman with silver hair and a spine like a drawn blade, Queen Mother Morwenna, Kaelin's mother. The most respected wolf in the kingdom, and the coldest heart in it. Both of them stopped just inside the door. Both of them saw the child on the bed, and both of them went pale. Kaelin would have missed it once. He did not miss it now. His wolf had ridden the edge of a knife all night, and it caught the two small tells the instant they surfaced. The tiny falter in Ophira's step, the way his mother stopped walking for exactly 1 heartbeat, a single beat no other wolf in the room would have marked. Neither of them looked at the boy the way a stranger looks at a strange child. They looked at him the way you look at something you were certain had been buried years ago. Not jealousy, not annoyance, not even surprise. Fear. Kalen filed it away and said nothing. What is the meaning of all this? His mother asked, recovering first, her voice regal. And even the whole territory is in an uproar. I am told there was gunfire at the founding, and that my son carried a serving girl home in his own arms before the whole pack. She shielded the boy, Kalen said. She took a bullet that was meant for him. His mother's gaze slid to the sleeping woman, then to the child, then back again, calculating, weighing. It was the same look she wore over a game board, and it dragged a low growl up through his chest before he could stop it. On the bed, the little boy stirred, his eyes opened. And the moment they landed on Ophira and the Queen Mother, he did the one thing he had not done for a single guard or nurse in the entire house. He shrank. He hauled the blanket up to his chin and pressed himself hard against his mother's side and stared at the two women with open, animal terror. Kalen watched it happen. The boy had not feared him. Had not feared Doran, or Alden, or the warriors who bore his mother through the halls. Only these two. Only them. As though he had seen their faces somewhere before, in some memory too dark for a child to carry. Interesting, Kalen thought, and the cold in his stomach spread wider. Ophira found her smile and fixed it back on. Poor little thing, she said softly, and took a step toward the bed. He must be so frightened. The child made a sound. Small, unmistakably a growl, thin and young but real. A warning rumble from a pup who had learned far too early what a threat looked like. Ophira stopped where she stood. Doran chose that moment to step through the door, and his face was iron. My king, a word. Kalen crossed to him at once. Speak. The shooters, Doran said, low enough that the room could pretend not to hear. The third we took alive. He is no rogue, my king. He answers to no pack I know. He was paid and paid well. Paid, Kalen repeated. And there is more. Doran hesitated, and a warrior of his rank did not hesitate for nothing. The shots were not scattered, my king. We walked the angles, ourselves. The first volley was aimed, and it was not aimed at you. Kalen felt the whole room drop a degree colder. At whom, then? Doran's eyes moved past him, to the bed, to the woman lying pale and still beneath the physician's bandages. He did not need to say it aloud. The answer was written in the line of every bullet that had found that dark gallery instead of the bright dais where a king had stood in plain sight all night. At her, Kalen said. The word dropped into the silence like a stone into a deep well, and behind him, so quick that most of the room would have sworn later they had imagined it, the future Luna and the Queen Mother traded a single glance, a flicker. There, and gone, most wolves would have missed it entirely. Kalen did not miss it. His wolf did not miss it. And for the first time since the chandelier came down in a rain of light, the Alpha King understood that the shooting had not been chaos at all. Someone had walked into that hall tonight with one purpose only: to finish a thing that had been left unfinished. And the two people who looked most afraid of the sleeping woman and her storm-gray child were standing inside his own house, wearing the two faces he had trusted longest in his life. Morning came gray and cold over the Ashvale estate. The storm of the night before had passed, but the house had not calmed. Guards stood doubled at every door. Kalen had slept in a chair in the corner of the infirmary, or, rather, he had not slept at all, because every time he closed his eyes he saw the same small face staring up at him from the dark, and the same word rose in his throat and refused to leave. The woman woke a little after dawn. Kalen saw her fingers move first, then her breath changed, then her eyes flew open, and before anyone could speak, panic tore through her whole body. She came up off the pillow with a cry, and the wound in her shoulder made her gasp, and still she did not stop. Bram, she said. Her voice cracked on the name. Bram. There? A nurse murmured, easing her back. He is here. He is safe. But the woman would not believe it until she saw it. Her head turned, wild, searching, and then she found him. The little boy was curled asleep against her side, one small hand still wrapped around hers, the worn signet resting against his collar. The moment she saw him, everything in her broke and remade itself. Relief flooded her face. Her shoulders sank, her free hand rose and hovered over his dark hair as though she did not quite dare to touch him, as though touching him might prove him a dream. Only then did she breathe. Only then did she let herself believe he was real. Kalen watched from across the room, and something turned over in his chest, something warm and aching that he had no name for. Watching her look at the boy felt like the most important thing he had ever seen. The reason stayed just out of reach. Then her gaze lifted from the child and swept the room. She took in the fine linens, the tall windows, the crest carved into the stone above the cold hearth, the ash veil crest. Her eyes moved across it slowly, and Kaylin saw the exact moment she understood where she was, and in whose house. And then she saw him. He was ready for many things. Fear, gratitude, the dazed confusion of someone who had nearly died. He was not ready for what he found. Her face did not soften, it hardened. Her eyes, which had been so full of love a moment before, went cold as river ice, and behind the cold burned something Kaylin had never once earned from a stranger. Hatred, old and deep and personal, the kind that takes years to grow. "You are safe here," Kaylin said. The words felt clumsy in his mouth. "No one will reach you or the boy again. You have my word." She laughed. It was a terrible sound, thin and broken. "Your word." Kaylin went still. She dragged herself upright against the pillows, ignoring the pain, ignoring the nurse who reached for her. Every movement was fury, barely held in check. When she spoke again, her voice shook, not with fear, but with something far worse. "Do not," she said. "Give me your word. I know exactly what it is worth." The ruler of the whole territory stood, rooted to the floor. He had faced armies. He had faced rebellion and famine, and the long knives of pack politics. Not one of them had ever made him feel the way this wounded serving woman made him feel now. Pinned by a look that said he had destroyed something precious, something that could never be put back. "I do not understand," he said quietly. "Have we met?" The question landed like a slap. For just a moment, her whole face came apart, and beneath the hatred, he saw the thing it had been built to hide. Pain, raw and bottomless, and years old. "Met," she whispered. Her eyes filled and did not spill. "You truly do not know me at all." Duran spoke from the doorway low. "My king. The agency that hired the staff has her name. She is listed as Anwen. No family on record. No home address that checks out. Anwen." Kaylin said it once, silently, and his wolf shivered as though the name were a key turned in a long rusted lock. Anwen looked away from him then, toward the window, toward the road beyond the walls, and she did not look back. Bram stirred against her side, woke, and the moment he saw her face above him, he flung his arms around her neck and burst into fresh tears. "Mama," he sobbed, "I thought they took you. I thought you were gone." Anwen gathered him in despite her ruined shoulder, despite the pain that whitened her face, and held him so tightly that Kaylin wondered if she would ever let go again. "I will never leave you," she whispered into his hair, over and over, the promise of a woman who had made it 1,000 times before. "Never, never." Kaylin looked away. The moment felt private, sacred. A door he had no right to stand in. And still he could not make himself leave the room. When at last Bram quieted, the boy lifted his head and found Kaylin across the room, and his small arms tightened around his mother in open warning. Anwen followed her son's gaze. The hatred returned to her eyes, colder than before, and this time, Kaylin felt it land somewhere deep and old, in a place he did not know he had. And Kaylin, who had never in his life felt guilty for a thing he could not remember doing, felt the weight of exactly that settle onto his chest and refused to lift. Over the next 3 days, Kaylin returned to that wing, far more often than he had any reason to. He told himself it was the investigation. Someone had tried to murder a woman under his roof, and a king demanded answers. That was true. It was also a lie, and he knew it. The truth was smaller and stranger, and would not let him go. He kept coming back, because of the boy. Bram. The child fascinated him, unsettled him, and would not leave his thought. Every hour spent near him made the impossible feel a little less impossible. The same dark curls, the same stubborn jaw, the same storm-gray eyes that Kalen met in the glass each morning. His wolf had stopped arguing about it entirely. It simply lay near the boy and watched him with a devotion that shamed the man it lived inside. Anwen would not speak to him. She turned to the wall when he entered and stayed there until he left. So Kalen learned what he could from the only one in that room who would still look at him. The first day, Bram only stared. The second, he answered questions in single words, his small body angled always toward the bed where his mother lay, ready to bolt back to her at the first sign of danger. By the third, he had begun, cautiously, to show Kalen the drawings the nurses gave him paper and pencils to make. Wolves, mostly. Crooked, lopsided wolves, with too many legs, each one carefully labeled in a child's shaky hand. Kalen praised every one as though it hung in a gallery, and slowly, the boy stopped flinching when he came near. There was one drawing Bram would not show him. He kept it folded under the corner of his blanket. And when Kalen's eyes drifted toward it, the boy covered it with his hand. Kalen did not press. He had learned, in 3 days, that pressing this child only closed him tighter, like a flower against frost. That is the alpha, Bram announced on the third afternoon, pointing to the largest of his wolves. Kalen raised an eyebrow. And this small one? The boy pointed to the smallest tucked protectively beneath the big one. That is Mama, he said. She is the strongest of all of them. Kalen almost smiled. Almost. She is smaller than the alpha, he pointed out. Bram looked at him as though he had said something very stupid. Being big is not the same as being strong, he said, and went back to his drawing. Does your mother sleep well? Kalen asked him a little later, gently, while Bram lined his drawings up along the windowsill. The small hands paused. Sometimes. Kalen waited. Sometimes she cries, Bram said, not looking up. When she thinks I am asleep. But I am not always asleep. Something twisted hard in Kalen's chest. What does she cry about? Bram shrugged one shoulder. He turned the worn ring on its cord between his fingers, round and round, a habit that looked older than he was. I do not know. Then his small face scrunched in thought. Maybe about my papa. Maybe about the person she watches for. Kalen went very still. Watches for? The boy nodded and pointed out the window, toward the long road that ran away from the estate and out of the territory. Every night, he said simply, she stands there and looks down the road, but she always looks. The room seemed to shrink. Kalen kept his voice very soft. Your papa? Bram nodded. He touched the ring again. This was his. Mama says he was a great man once. She says he had eyes just like mine. He looked up then, and the storm gray met Kalen's own, and the child said the thing that stopped the Alpha King's heart in his chest. She says I look just like him, so she cannot ever let anyone see my face too close. Because if the wrong person sees, they will know. And if they know, Bram said, lowering his voice to a frightened whisper, as though repeating a rule drilled into him since before he could walk, the bad ones will come and take me away. Kalen could not speak. A headache bloomed white and sudden behind his eyes. Water. Moonlight on dark water. A woman laughing somewhere. He could not see. The fragments flashed and were gone before he could seize them, leaving only a dull ache and the certain, terrible sense that he was standing at the edge of something vast and dark and had been for a very long time. Who told your mama that he managed about the bad ones? Bram only shook his head and went back to his wolves. But at the wall, her back still turned. Anwen had gone very still, and Kaelin understood that she had heard every word. Ophira found him that evening in his study. She did not knock. She never had. She swept in wearing her certainty like a second gown, and Kaelin felt the old, dull weight of expectations settle over the room the moment she entered. "My love," she said, "we must speak about the ceremony." Kaelin did not look up from the reports on his desk. The financial trail of the man Doran had taken alive. Payments routed through 3 false names, and a shipping account that led so far, exactly nowhere. Later he said, "No." The word came out sharp, and even she seemed surprised by it. Ophira softened at once, crossed to the desk, laid a hand on the papers as though to close them. "You have spent 3 days in that wing, Kaelin. 3 days. The whole pack is talking. Your wedding is in a month, and you sit at the bedside of a nameless serving girl and her child, like a man bewitched." "She has a name," Kaelin said. "It is Anwen." Something crossed Ophira's face and vanished. "A serving girl," she repeated, more quietly, "and a child who is not your concern. You have a territory to rule. You have a Luna to crown. Instead, you play nursemaid to a stranger the moment she bleeds on your floor. And, for what? Why do you care so much for a woman you had never laid eyes on before that night?" The question sat there between them, and Kaelin opened his mouth to answer it, and found that he could not, because he did not know. He did not know why her hatred cut deeper than any wound. He did not know why the boy felt like his own blood. He did not know why the name Anwen turned a key inside him, or why his sleep had filled, these last 3 nights, with the same broken dream: a shoreline, moonlight lying silver across still water. A woman he could not see clearly, laughing, her hand warm in his, a ring passing from his palm to hers, beneath a full and watching moon. "Kaelin," Ophira said, and her voice had gone very careful. "Why can you not answer me?" He rose from the desk. His silence had become its own reply, and they both heard it. For the first time in the long years of their arrangement, Ophira looked at him and did not see a man she was sure of. Fear flickered behind her eyes, quick and cold, the same fear he had seen in the infirmary. And once again it was not jealousy, and once again it made no sense. "She is not your concern," Ophira said at last, and this time it was almost a plea. "Send her away when she heals. Give her coin, and let her go, before something you cannot undo is done." That, Kaelin thought, was a strange thing for her to say. He looked at the woman he was meant to marry, and now, at last, he truly looked. The way his wolf had been begging him to look since the chandelier fell. "What are you afraid of?" "Ophira, nothing," she said too fast. She left soon after, and Kaelin stood a long while at the dark window, the dream shoreline lapping at the edges of his mind. He tried, as he had tried, every night, for 3 nights, to force the woman in the dream into focus, to see her face. Each time she turned toward him, the vision dissolved like a reflection struck by a thrown stone, and he was left with only the sound of her laughter and the ghost of warmth against his palm, where a ring had once passed between 2 hands. He thought of Anwen standing at the road every night, looking down it, telling her son she was not waiting. He thought of the ring on the boy's cord, worn smooth by years of turning. He thought of the way his own wolf had gone still, and reverent the instant it saw that child, the way no wolf did for a stranger's son. Somewhere in this house, a wounded woman hated him for a crime he could not name, and a small boy wore a stranger's ring and had been taught to hide his own face, and the 2 people who should have loved him best flinched every time that child breathed. He had spent 3 days telling himself none of it made sense. Standing there in the dark, Kaelin finally admitted the truth. It made perfect sense. He simply had not yet been allowed to remember it. He crossed to his desk, took up the reports on the paid shooter, and beside them laid a second command written in his own hand. He wanted every record the palace held from 6 years ago. Every transfer, every payment. every name that had passed through these walls in the season, his memory turned strangely, treacherously thin. And with a cold and settling certainty, the Alpha King decided that whatever it cost him, whoever it broke, he was going to learn the truth his own house had buried. Anwen was strong enough to stand by the 5th day. That was the day she came to find him. Kaelin was in his study when the guards announced her. She stepped through the door with Bram at her side. One hand curved over the boy's shoulder, her chin lifted, her spine straight, despite the sling that still bound her arm. She had traded the nurse's shift for her own plain clothes. Washed and pressed, she had the look of a woman who had made a decision and would not be moved from it. "We are leaving," she said. "Today." Kaelin came to his feet before he knew he had risen. "No," her eyes narrowed. "I am not asking," she said. "It is not safe. Someone tried to kill you both a handful of days ago. The men who paid for it are still free. You cannot walk out of these gates and expect to live. We survived without your walls for a long time. We will manage, you will not," Kaelin said, and heard how raw it came out and could not stop it. The thought of her walking back down that road, of the boy vanishing into the wide, dark world where he could not reach either of them, closed a fist around something in his chest. "We are close, Anwen, close to the ones who did this. Give me a little more time, and I will end the danger. For good." Something flickered across her face at the word time, something bitter enough to curdle. She turned to her son and crouched to his level, her voice gentling all at once. "Bram, love, go and wait with the kind nurse for a moment. I will call you soon." The boy looked between them, reading the air the way children always could. He did not want to go. But he went, with one last wary glance at Kaelin, and the door closed behind him. And then it was only the two of them, and the silence had teeth. Kaelin opened his mouth. "Anwen, I do not," she said, "say my name. Not the way you say it. Like it is new to your tongue, like you have not said it 1,000 times before." He went cold and still. "What do you mean?" Her composure broke then, all at once, like a dam giving way. "6 years," she said, and her voice shook with the weight of every one of them. 6 years. I have waited for you to look at me the way you are looking at me now. Confused, curious, as though I am a puzzle, as though I am a stranger who wandered in from the rain. And I told myself, if that day ever came, I would spit in your face for it. But you are not even lying, are you? You truly do not know. That is somehow the cruelest thing you have ever done to me, and you have done a great many cruel things. I have never in my life laid eyes on you before that night," Kaelin said, and the desperation in it was real, because some deep part of him already knew he was wrong. Anwen laughed, and it was a wet and broken sound. Then she stepped close, closer than anyone had dared come to him in years, until he could see every sleepless night carved into her face, every private grief she had carried alone. "You gave me a ring by the water," she whispered. "You pressed it into my hand, and you closed my fingers over it. You said the moon could drown itself in that lake and climb back out 1,000 times over, and you would still find your way to me. You said there was nothing in this world or the next that could make you forget me." The floor dropped out from under him, water, moonlight, lying silver and unbroken across a still black lake, a ring warm from his own hand passing into hers. Her laugh, that same laugh, ringing out across the water, close now, so close, the face at the center of it swimming up out of the dark toward focus for the very first time. Pain split Kaelin's skull like an axe. He staggered. His hand found the edge of the desk and missed. A sound tore out of him, half word, half growl, and the room tilted and blurred as fragments began slamming into him, one after another, too fast to hold, too many to bear, not enough to understand, and more than enough to break him open. He went down hard onto one knee. The images came faster now, a flood battering a cracked wall, a wooden dock, warm under bare feet, a storm rolling in over the far hills. and the two of them laughing as they ran for shelter. A morning she had burned the bread and blamed him for it. 100 small ordinary hours that his own mind had walled away from him, breaking loose all at once, and cutting him on their way out. Anwen's hands shot out on pure instinct, catching his arm, and for one heartbeat her whole face was nothing but terror and tenderness, and 6 years of love she had never managed to kill. "Kylan," she breathed, and this time his name was not a weapon. Then she remembered. He watched it happen, watched her recall who he was and what she believed he had done, watched the walls slam back into place behind her eyes. She let go of his arm as though it had burned her, and stepped back, and back again. "I cannot do this," she said, barely a whisper. "Not again." And she turned and left him there on the floor of his own study, one hand pressed to his splitting skull, while the first true pieces of a stolen past clawed their way up out of the dark at last. Kylan did not remember reaching his chambers. One moment he was on the floor of the study. The next, he stood alone in the dark of his own rooms, the moon hanging low and full outside the tall windows, its light lying across the floor like something spilled. His head would not stop pounding. The fragments would not stop coming. A lake, a summer, a laugh, a promise. They surged and receded like a tide, showing him the shape of a thing without ever letting him see it whole, and his wolf paced and clawed and howled inside him, screaming a single word he could no longer silence. "Remember." Then his eye fell on the small folded drawing lying on the table by the door. Bram's drawing. The one he would never show. A servant must have found it and set it there. Or the boy had left it behind in his flight from the study. Kylan crossed to it slowly, his heart hammering for reasons he could not name. He unfolded it with shaking hands. It was not a wolf. It was a lake, under a round white moon, drawn in a child's careful hand. 2 figures stood at the water's edge, a tall one and a smaller one, their stick hands joined. Above them, the boy had drawn a ring, huge and gold, and ringed with wobbly lines to show that it shone. And beneath it, in the shaky letters of a child who had only just learned them, 4 words: "Where Papa forgot us." Kylan made a sound he had never made before. He did not decide to move. He was simply moving, out the door, down the corridor, past the startled guards, to the wing where a wounded woman and her son slept. He pushed the door open, without knocking. Anwen came awake at once, half rising, and Bram stirred against her. But Kylan was not looking at either of their faces. He was looking at the ring, the worn signet, on its leather cord, rising and falling, with the boy's sleeping breath. "May I?" he said, and his voice was not a king's voice at all. It was a beggar's. Anwen stared at him. Something in his face must have stopped the refusal in her throat. Slowly watching him the whole while, she lifted the cord over her son's head and held it out. The moment the ring touched Kylan's palm, the world shattered. Not fragments this time, not pieces, everything, all of it. He remembered the lake. He remembered the summer, 6 years gone, when the throne still felt like a collar, and his mother still ruled the court, in all but name, and a marriage to Ophira's powerful bloodline had already been arranged over his head like a sentence. He remembered slipping away to the old water on the far edge of the territory, where no one knew his face. He remembered a young woman who lived at the lake's edge, who did not know he was a king, who argued with him and laughed at him and pulled him out of the water the day the current took him under. Anwen. He remembered Anwen. He remembered the exact moment his wolf had risen up and named her, not chosen, not arranged, not politics, mate, true and fated and certain, the way the tide is certain, the way the moon is. The plans whispered against her hair, his own vow to break the arrangement, to face his mother, to bring this laughing girl home and crown her Luna, and let the great families rage. He remembered the small things too, the ones that undid him worst of all, the way she hummed with no tune while she worked, the scar on her thumb from a fishing line. The morning he had told her, only half joking, that his wolf had never once settled for anyone, until her, and the way she had gone quiet and then kissed him, as though he had handed her the whole sky. He had meant every word. He had meant to spend his life proving it. He remembered the ring, pressing it into her hand under the full moon, the promise, every word of it in his own voice. And then he remembered the poison. Kalen dropped to his knees in the middle of the room. The memory came without mercy now. The cup at his mother's table, the fire that had spread through his veins, the long white nothing after. And when he had finally clawed his way back to waking, weeks gone, his mind full of holes, they had been waiting for him, his mother, Ophira. A soft voice at his bedside explaining, so patiently, so kindly, that the girl by the lake had been a plant sent by his enemies, a thief, a liar, that she had taken what she wanted and fled the territory, that she had died on the road not long after in a rogue attack, that he was well rid of her, that he should rest now, that he should forget. And the poison had made sure he did. For 6 years, Kalen had believed a dead traitor slept somewhere in an unmarked grave. He had grieved her as a wound he could not explain, and then slowly stopped grieving and let them steer him back toward the marriage they had always wanted, never once knowing that the woman he mourned was alive. That she had not betrayed him. That she had not died. That she had been cast out with his child in her belly, and a threat in her ears told that he had woken and chosen the throne and denounced her, told that if she ever breathed a word of the bond or the boy, the child would not live to see another moon. She had run to save their son. She had spent 6 years believing he had thrown her away, and he had spent those same 6 years believing she was dead and false, because the 2 women who called themselves his family had reached into his mind and rewritten the truth in their own hand. The cruelty of it kept unfolding, layer beneath layer. They had not simply parted them. They had poisoned the memory itself, so that even in his dreams he would reach for her and find only a stranger, a shadow, a grief with no name to fasten it to. They had made certain that if he ever grieved her, he would grieve her as a liar. They had taken not only the woman, but the very truth of her, and left him a hollow story to mourn instead. Keelan knelt on the floor and wept, the ring closed in his fist, and across the room Anwen watched him, with her own tears standing in her eyes, because she was beginning, at last, to understand that the man before her— "I did not leave you," he said. When he could speak, the words came out in pieces. "I never left you. They took you from me, and then they took you out of my own head. Anwen." He looked up at her, ruined, unguarded, a king with nothing left to rule. "I have been mourning you for 6 years, and I did not even know your name." The Queen Mother came to his study near midnight, because he sent for her, and because she still believed she had a son who obeyed. She found Kalen behind his desk with a stack of records before him. 6 years of them. Transfer orders, payment ledgers, a physician's bribed silence, a shipping account that ran, at last, all the way home. Beside the papers lay a worn signet ring and a child's drawing of a lake. Morwenna saw his face and stopped in the doorway. For the first time in her long life, the most composed woman in the kingdom did not know what to say. "Sit," Kalen said. She sat. He did not shout. He slid the records across the desk to her, one at a time, and named each one as it went. The poison bought from a trader across the mountains. The healer paid to call it a fever. The order that struck Anwen's name from every record in the house. The men set to watch the roads for a girl who was never supposed to be found. The Queen Mother's own signature, again and again and again, on every one. Each page landed between them and lay there, undeniable. Kalen watched his mother's face as the pile grew, watched the certainty he had trusted his whole life curdle slowly into something small and cornered. He had spent his whole reign believing this woman was the truest heart in his court. He had built his judgment on hers, and with every page, another piece of the man he had thought himself to be quietly died. By the third page, she had stopped denying. By the fifth, she had stopped pretending to be surprised. When the silence had gone on long enough to bury them both, she lifted her chin and said the thing she had told herself for 6 years, the thing that had let her sleep. "You were never meant to meet her," she said. "A caretaker's daughter from a lake, nobody remembers. You were born to unite the great bloodlines, not to throw your throne away on a girl who smelled of pond water. So, you erased her," Kaelin said, "from the world, and then from me." "I saved you," his mother said. And the terrible thing was that she believed it to the marrow. "You would have ruined everything for a summer's fancy. Every alliance your father died to build, every year I spent holding this territory together while you played at love by a lake, all of it thrown away for a pretty face and a warm bed. I gave you back your future. You should be thanking me." Kaelin closed his eyes. "And when you learned there was a child." Morwenna said nothing. That was answer enough. But he made her say it, his alpha power leaking into the room until the windows shivered in their frames and the candles guttered low. And at last she did. "We could not allow a rival claim," she said, very quietly. "A son of your blood, raised in the shadows, is a knife pointed at everything we built." When the girl was recognized at the hiring hall and we learned they both still lived, a decision had to be made. "So you sent gunmen to a crowded hall," Kylan said, "to murder a woman and a 5-year-old boy. Your own grandson." "He is not my grandson," Morwenna said. "He is a mistake wearing your eyes." Ophira stood there, summoned by the queen, and she took one look at the ring on the desk and the ruin on Kaelin's face, and she understood that everything was already lost. To her credit, she did not scream. To her shame, the first thing she reached for was a smile. "Kaelin," she said, "let me explain. There's nothing you can say," he told her, "that I will believe." He did not exile them that night. He did something colder and more patient. He let the wedding preparations go on exactly as planned, and he let his mother and his intended believe, through all the long days that followed, that his silence meant surrender, that in the end the Alpha King would do what he had always done and choose the throne. They should have known better. They had built their whole crime on how easily he could be made to forget. They had forgotten, in their turn, how he loved. The day of the mating ceremony dawned bright and golden. The pack gathered in their thousands, banners flying, the great hall repaired and gleaming, all of it exactly as it had been on founding night, save that this time everyone had come to see their king take a Luna. Ophira wore silver and a triumphant smile. Morwenna sat in the place of highest honor. The head elder lifted his hands to begin. Kaelin stepped to the front of the platform, and his aura rolled out across the hall, and every wolf in it fell silent at once. "I will not be taking this woman as my Luna," he said. The hall erupted. Ophira's smile cracked straight down the middle. "What?" she whispered, the word escaping before she could stop it. Kaelin did not raise his voice, and somehow that made it carry further into every corner of that vast and gilded room. Before this pack and beneath this moon, he laid it all bare. The summer by the lake, the bond they had severed, the poison poured into his own cup at his own mother's table, the lie of a dead traitor sold to a grieving king, the young woman driven from her home with their son unborn, and a warning that would haunt her for years. The gunmen sent to a crowded hall on founding night to finish what 6 years had not. Each sentence struck the crowd like a fresh blow. Wolves who had come to cheer a wedding stood frozen, hands over mouths, turning to one another in horror. He named his mother, and 1,000 heads turned toward the Queen Mother in her place of honor, and she did not flinch, because she had run out of masks to wear. He named his intended, and Ophira shrank beneath 10,000 stares. He lifted a worn signet ring high for the whole pack to see, and told them it belonged to his son. His son. The word went through the hall like a wave. Mate and son, the true Luna and the stolen heir, and the great families who had spent 6 years congratulating themselves on a clever match, understood, all at once, exactly what had been done in their name. Ophira was weeping now, whether from grief, or fury, or terror, no longer mattered. "Kaelin," she cried, pushing forward, reaching for him, "I love you, I have always loved you. Everything I did because I could not bear to lose you." "You had 6 years," he said, "to say a single true word to me. You spent every one of them making certain I could not remember the woman I actually love. That is not love. That is a cage you painted to look like one." He stripped them where they stood. Ophira Vess, her titles gone, her betrothal broken, and her name struck from the rolls of the pack, banished from the territory before the sunset, and forbidden ever to return. She collapsed to her knees on the platform where she had expected to be crowned, and no hand in all that crowd reached down to lift her. And then his mother. It was the hardest word he had ever spoken, and the hall held its breath to hear whether he would send her to the grave she had earned. Kaelin looked at the woman who had raised him, who had taught him honor with one hand while she unmade his life with the other, and he found he could not do it. Queen Mother Morwenna, removed from all authority, barred from the packhouse, stripped of every office and every voice in the affairs of the throne, left with only her name and her life, because she was still his mother, and even now, even after everything, he could not put her in the ground where she had twice tried to put his son. Mercy, he understood, was not the same as forgiveness. She would have neither from him again, but she would keep her breath, and she would spend the rest of it knowing exactly what she had thrown away. Then Kaelin turned his back on the both of them, and walked down off the platform and out of the hall, and did not once look back. The lake had not changed. Kaelin stood at the edge of the old water where the whole of his real life had begun and been stolen in a single summer, and for a long moment he could not make himself move. The small house at the water's edge stood just as it had 6 years ago, weathered and plain and lonely. Smoke rose from its chimney. Somewhere behind it a child was laughing. Anwen had not stayed to watch the ceremony fall apart. The moment the truth was out, and the danger with it, she had gathered her son and come back here, to the only home the two of them had ever known, as though none of the palace had ever touched her. Maybe it never had. Maybe after 6 years there was nothing left in that house she wanted. Kaelin walked to the door and knocked. The laughter stopped. After a long moment, the door opened, and Anwen stood there, and the sight of her hurt more now than it ever had, because now he remembered every day he had lost. Her eyes went hard. She began to close the door. "Please," Kaelin said, and put his hand against it, not to force it, to beg. "Please." She stared at him. Kaelin Ashvale did not beg. Kings did not. Althas did not. And he never had in all the years she had known him. And yet here he was, on her step, with nothing of the crown left in his face. "I remember," he said. "All of it. Everything they took. Whatever fight was left in her. Drained away." And she let the door swing open, and she let him in. He told her everything, sitting in the small, plain room where he had once been happy. The poison. The lie. His mother's confession. The wedding he had burned to the ground. He hid nothing, and he excused nothing, because there was no excuse, only the truth, and she deserved every ugly piece of it. When he finished, the little room was quiet, and Anwen sat with her hands folded and her eyes down, and he could not read her, and it terrified him more than any battlefield ever had. "I waited," she said at last, so softly, he almost missed it. "Every night for the first year, I stood at the road, and I waited. I was so sure you would come." She drew a breath that shook. "Then I thought you must be trapped somewhere, that only chains could keep you from us. And then, after long enough, I made myself believe the thing they told me. That you had simply weighed me against a crown, and chosen the crown, and that I had been a fool to think a king could ever love a girl who smelled of pond water." Kaelin flinched at the phrase. She saw it. "They said that to you too," she said quietly. "It was not a question. It was my mother's," he admitted. "I am ashamed to share blood with the mouth that made it." "That was never true," Kaelin said. The whole of it, and his voice broke on it. Not for one moment of one day. I did not choose the crown over you. I was never given the choice at all. If I had been Anwin, I would have set the throne on fire and walked into that lake to reach you. I know that now, she whispered. And somehow that is worse. Because it means we both lost the same 6 years to the same lie, and no one alive can ever give them back. I grieved a man who chose to leave me. You grieved a woman you were told was dead. And all the while, we were both only a few days' road apart, mourning ghosts that were never real. The tears came then, for both of them, the quiet kind. And the kind that comes from being hurt too long and too deeply to make any noise about it. They sat in a small room, where their whole life had once begun, and let themselves feel at last the full and terrible size of what had been taken. A small voice broke the silence. "Mama?" Bram stood in the inner doorway, watching them with his solemn storm-gray eyes, understanding more than any child his age should. He looked at his mother's tears, and then at Kaelin, and then he crossed the room, slowly, and stopped in front of the man who had his eyes. "Are you him?" the boy asked. "The one in the drawing. Are you my papa?" Kaelin lowered himself to the floor, so their eyes were level. "Yes," he said, "I am. And I am so sorry it took me so long to find you." Bram studied him with the terrible frankness of the very young. "You forgot us," he said. "It was only true. Someone made me forget," Kaelin said. "I would never have chosen it. I searched for your mother in my sleep every night for 6 years, and never once knew whose face I was chasing." He swallowed. "I cannot give you back the time. I would give anything too. All I can do is never miss another day for as long as I live, if you will let me stay." The boy was quiet for a long moment, weighing it with the whole seriousness of his 5 years. "You missed my birthdays," he said, "all of them." Kaelin bowed his head. "I did. And you were not there when I learned to swim," Bram went on. "And Mama had to teach me by herself, and she was scared the whole time." "I know," Kaelin said. "I know. And I am sorry, and being sorry is not enough. And I will spend the rest of my life anyway." Bram considered this. Then he reached out and pressed the worn ring on its cord back into Kaelin's hand, closing his father's fingers over it, exactly the way it had been given to his mother by the water long ago. "You should keep this," Bram said, "so you do not forget again." Kaelin broke. He gathered his son against him and wept into his dark hair. And after a moment, small arms came up and held him back. And across the little room Anwin watched the two of them, her hand pressed to her mouth, 6 years of grief cracking open to let something else through at last. Not forgiveness, not all of it, not yet. It would take time. It would take a great deal of time, but she did not tell him to go. She crossed the room instead, and sat down on the floor beside them, close enough that their shoulders touched, and let herself, for the first time in 6 long years, begin to hope. And beneath the same moon that had watched them make a promise by the water, a family stolen by a lie began, slowly and imperfectly and truly, to find its way back to itself. Thank you so much for spending this time with me and for staying to the very end of Kaelin, Anwin, and little Bram's story. I hope their journey moved your heart the way it moved mine while I told it. If this story reached you tonight, take a moment to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next tale from our little pack. And before you go, I would love to know where in the world you are listening from. Leave your country, your city, or just your corner of the sky in the comments below, because I read every one, and it always amazes me how far our story family truly reaches. Until we meet again, be gentle with yourselves, hold your loved ones close, and may the moon goddess light every road that leads you home.